story begins in the early months of 2018, when a young graduate named Laura moved to a bustling city in search of work. Rent was high, and she couldn't afford a place alone. When she found a listing online for a 2-bedroom apartment at half the market price, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. The only catch, she had to share it with a roommate. Think about it, have you ever been tempted by a deal that looked too good to be true? Maybe a rental, a job offer, or even an online purchase. That's exactly how Laura felt. She told herself that everyone gets lucky sometimes, and perhaps this was her turn. The roommate, a man named Daniel, had already been living in the apartment for a year. According to the landlord, he was quiet, respectful, and barely noticeable. Laura's initial meeting with him seemed fine. He was polite, soft-spoken, and almost too accommodating. She brushed off the awkward silence between them as simple shyness. But from the very first night, small details began to gnaw at her. Why did Daniel keep his bedroom door locked at all times, even when he was home? And why did she hear faint noises, like whispering or scratching, coming from his side of the apartment long after midnight? What would you do if your new roommate seemed to be hiding something? Would you confront them or ignore it, hoping it's nothing? Let me know in the comments. Laura unpacked her belongings slowly, trying not to disturb the quiet of the apartment. Daniel had retreated into his room almost immediately after she arrived. He barely said goodnight, closing his door with a click that echoed louder than it should have in the narrow hallway. Laura brushed it off, telling herself that some people just needed space. Still, she couldn't ignore the faint sound of the locks sliding into place. She settled into her room, but as the night stretched on, she struggled to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, seemed sharper in the silence. Then she heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound. At first, she thought it might be mice in the walls, but the noise had a strange consistency, like someone dragging their nails lightly across wood. It came from Daniel's room. Her body tensed as she lay frozen under the covers. The scratching would stop for a minute, then resume, followed by what sounded like a low murmur. She couldn't make out the words, but the cadence suggested someone talking. Alone in her bed, she tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was on the phone. Maybe he had insomnia and was pacing, muttering to himself. She clung to those explanations, but none seemed to fit. By morning, the noises had ceased, and Daniel acted as though nothing had happened. He greeted her politely in the kitchen, asking if she had slept well. Laura hesitated, searching his face for a sign of recognition, something that would confirm he had been awake and making noise. Instead, his expression was blank, calm, and unsettlingly normal. She smiled awkwardly and said, "Yes, fine," but the truth was, she hadn't slept at all. If you were in Laura's shoes, would you ask your roommate about the noises? Or would you keep quiet and hope it never happens again? Comment what you do below. Laura quickly noticed that living with Daniel came with unspoken rules. The first was the kitchen. He insisted on labeling every item in the fridge, even the condiments, and seemed irritated if something was moved out of place. Laura chalked it up to quirkiness, but the way he stared at the shelves after she cooked, as though checking for changes, left her uneasy. The second rule revealed itself when Laura accidentally passed by his door one afternoon while he was inside. She heard what sounded like hurried footsteps, then the unmistakable snap of a lock. He opened the door slightly, just enough to look at her. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, almost warning her to move along. Without a word, he closed the door again. It struck her as strange. Roommates usually grew more comfortable with time. Daniel seemed determined to remain a stranger. One evening, Laura asked if they could watch a movie together, hoping to break the ice. Daniel declined, saying he preferred quiet nights. His tone wasn't rude, but there was finality to it. Laura felt a chill then. This wasn't just shyness. He wanted distance, as though any overlap between their lives was unwelcome. That night, she stayed up late working on her laptop at the kitchen table. Around 1 a.m., the scratching sound began again, slow, deliberate, and paired with the faint rhythm of whispering. Laura set her mug down, staring at the closed door across the hall. Her curiosity and fear collided, leaving her in a silent standoff. She wanted to knock, to ask what was happening, but something deep inside her warned against it. What do you think Daniel was doing behind that locked door? Leave your guesses in the comments. I'll be reading them. It didn't take long for Laura to realize the door to Daniel's room was more than just a boundary. It was a barrier. Day or night, it stayed locked. When he left for work in the mornings, she noticed how he always pocketed the key quickly, as though afraid she might somehow get to it. Even if he only stepped out to check the mailbox, she could hear the lock turn before he walked down the hallway. One afternoon, while cleaning, Laura accidentally knocked over a broom, and it slid toward his door. She bent to pick it up and saw something unusual. Deep scratches around the frame, near the lock. At first glance, they looked like old marks from moving furniture, but as she traced them with her finger, she realized they were too precise, too concentrated near the latch. Someone had tried to pry the door open or had tried to get out. The discovery sent a cold shiver through her. She told herself not to overthink it, yet her imagination filled the silence with terrible possibilities. Why would a roommate feel the need to secure a room so thoroughly? And why would there be marks suggesting a struggle with the lock itself? That night, she couldn't resist testing the knob while Daniel was out. Her hand trembled as she turned it gently. Predictably, it was locked, but the sensation of the cold metal against her skin made her realize something unsettling. She wasn't just curious anymore, she was afraid. Afraid of what she might find inside if the door ever opened. If you saw those scratches around a locked door in your own home, would you dare to open it or leave it alone? Share your thoughts below. A few days later, Laura came home earlier than usual. The apartment was quiet, except for a faint hum coming from Daniel's room. She assumed it was music or a fan, until she pressed her ear lightly against the wall. It wasn't music at all, it was chanting. A steady, low voice repeating something she couldn't fully understand. Startled, she backed away just as Daniel's door opened. He stepped out, and for the first time since they met, his calm demeanor shifted. His eyes flickered to the spot where she had been standing, and his jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be near my door," he said softly, almost whispering. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight like a rule that had just been spoken aloud for the first time. Laura stammered an apology, claiming she was just walking past. Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he gave her a slow, measured nod before retreating back into his room and locking the door again. The lock clicked in place, louder than ever. She stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding. From that night on, Laura felt the atmosphere of the apartment shift. It was no longer about two people sharing a space. It was about her existing in a place that belonged entirely to him. Every time she crossed the hall, every time she heard the faint sounds from his room, she remembered his warning. And she knew with absolute certainty that whatever Daniel was doing behind that locked door, he did not want her to know. Would you confront a roommate after hearing something strange like chanting? Or would you avoid the subject completely? Drop your answer in the comments. Laura tried to brush off the warning and live as normally as she could, but the atmosphere in the apartment grew heavier by the day. She worked long hours at her new job, and every night when she returned, the building felt unnervingly still. Daniel's room was always locked, his blinds always shut, and his presence always muted, like a shadow lingering in the background. One night, around 2 a.m., Laura awoke to the sound of footsteps. At first, she thought it was the neighbors upstairs, but the noise was too close. Her bedroom door was cracked open slightly, and through the narrow slit she saw a faint movement in the hallway. Someone was standing there. She froze, barely daring to breathe. The figure lingered for a moment before moving past her door. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps continued until they reached the kitchen. She heard a drawer open, followed by the distinct clatter of silverware. Then silence. Laura lay stiff in bed, her body tight with dread, straining to hear if the footsteps would return. After what felt like hours, she mustered the courage to peek out. The hallway was empty, the kitchen lights off. But when she checked the drawer the next morning, a single knife was missing. She told herself Daniel had probably taken it to his room for some reason, but the explanation rang hollow. What roommate needed to keep a knife by their bedside? If you woke up and realized your roommate was standing outside your bedroom at night, would you move out immediately or stay to figure out what was going on? Tell me what you'd do. The following evening, Laura returned home to find a folded piece of paper tucked beneath her bedroom door. Her heart sank before she even opened it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and unmistakably Daniel's. The note read, "Do not leave your door unlocked at night." She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the words, her hands trembling. It wasn't written as advice, it felt like a command, a rule. She read it over and over, trying to understand the intent behind it. Was it meant as a warning for her safety, or was it meant as a reminder that Daniel was watching? When she finally gathered the courage to ask him about it, Daniel didn't deny writing it. He only smiled faintly and said, "It's for your own good." The conversation ended there. No explanation, no further detail, just that single sentence that rang louder in Laura's head than anything else he could have said. That night, she made sure her door was firmly locked. She lay awake for hours, every sound amplified in the silence. Around 3 a.m., she heard footsteps again, slow, measured, moving toward her room. The handle turned gently, just once. A test. When the lock held, the footsteps receded, followed by the familiar sound of Daniel's door closing. What do you think Daniel meant by, "It's for your own good"? Was it a warning or a threat? Comment your thoughts below. A week later, Laura began to notice a faint odor seeping into the hallway outside Daniel's room. At first, it was subtle, like damp clothes left too long in a closed space. But within days, it grew stronger, an acrid, sour smell that clung to the air. Every time she passed his door, she felt her stomach churn. She tried to ignore it, lighting candles in her own room and keeping the windows open. But the odor crept under her door at night, strong enough to wake her from sleep. One evening, unable to stand it any longer, she knocked softly on Daniel's door. He didn't answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Finally, his voice came through, calm but strained. "Don't worry about it. I'll handle it." The smell persisted. By the fourth night, Laura noticed something else. Daniel had started keeping a large black trash bag by his door. It appeared in the morning and was gone by evening, though she never saw him carry it out. The contents remained a mystery. What unsettled her most was the weight of the bag. It sagged, heavy and uneven, as though something solid pressed against the plastic from within. Her instincts screamed that something was wrong. She considered calling the landlord or even the police, but she hesitated. What if it was something harmless like old food or cleaning supplies? What if she was overreacting? Still, the stench in the air told her otherwise. Something inside that room did not belong in an apartment or anywhere near another person. If you were Laura, would you call the authorities at this point? Or would you wait, fearing it might just be a misunderstanding? Share what you do in the comments. Late one Friday night, Laura returned from work to find something unusual. Voices. She froze just outside the apartment door, listening carefully. Daniel never had visitors. In fact, he once told her he preferred solitude. But tonight, there was no mistaking it, someone else was inside. She opened the door slowly, expecting to see people in the living room. Instead, the apartment was dark, silent, and empty. The voices had stopped. Only Daniel's door was shut, and a faint strip of light leaked out from beneath it. Laura's pulse quickened. She set her bag down and waited in the living room, pretending to scroll on her phone. Minutes later, the whispers resumed. They weren't casual conversations or laughter. They were muffled, hurried, almost like arguments in hushed tones. Laura strained to hear words, but the language seemed garbled, distorted, as if spoken too quickly or too softly for comprehension. Then came a sound that made her skin crawl. A sharp thud, followed by a low groan. The apartment fell silent again. Laura stood frozen, staring at the closed door, her thoughts racing. Who was in there with him? Why hadn't she seen anyone leave or enter? She considered knocking, demanding an answer, but the same primal fear that had held her back so many times before rooted her to the spot. She went to her room, locked the door, and lay awake, listening. The whispers never returned that night, but the image of someone or something hidden in Daniel's room refused to leave her mind. If your roommate suddenly had strange visitors that you never saw come or go, would you confront them, or would you start planning your escape? Let me know in the comments. One evening, Laura came home to find the bathroom door locked. First, she assumed Daniel was inside, but after 20 minutes of waiting, the silence on the other side of the door felt wrong. No running water, no footsteps, no movement at all. She knocked lightly. "Daniel? Are you there?" No answer. She waited another 5 minutes, her nerves fraying. Finally, the lock clicked open, and the door swung ajar just enough for Daniel to step out. His clothes were damp, his hair dripping as if he had just showered. But there was no steam, no scent of soap, no sign the shower had been used at all. Laura glanced inside as he moved past her. The bathroom was spotless, too spotless. The floor was bone dry. The mirror gleamed without a single smear of condensation. Even the towel rack was untouched. Daniel caught her looking and closed the door behind him quickly. His face was calm, but his eyes lingered on hers with something close to a warning. That night, Laura's mind spun. If he hadn't been showering, what had he been doing in there? And why lock the door for so long? She thought back to the smell outside his bedroom, the missing knife, the whispers she couldn't explain. Each piece on its own seemed strange but manageable. Together, they painted a picture she wasn't ready to face. If you discovered your roommate using the bathroom in such a suspicious way, would you investigate further or distance yourself completely? Comment below what you'd do. It happened on a stormy night. Laura was in her room working on her laptop when, without warning, the entire apartment went dark. The power cut out abruptly, plunging everything into silence. Only the faint glow of city lights filtered through her curtains. She sat frozen, waiting for the power to flicker back. But it didn't. Instead, she heard the unmistakable sound of Daniel's door unlocking. Slowly, carefully. Then, footsteps in the hallway. She held her breath, hoping he was just checking the circuit breaker. But the footsteps didn't move toward the utility closet. They moved toward her room. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. Just as she did, the beam of light illuminated the crack beneath her door. A shadow moved across it, slow, deliberate, pausing directly in front of her room. She clutched the phone tighter, praying the lock on her door would hold. Minutes dragged like hours before the footsteps finally retreated. She heard Daniel's door close again, followed by the soft click of his lock sliding back into place. Almost immediately afterward, the power returned. Lights buzzed back to life, and the apartment looked as though nothing had happened. But Laura knew better. That blackout hadn't been an accident, it was a test. If the power went out and you saw your roommate's shadow lingering outside your door, what would you do? Confront them or start packing your things? Share your thoughts below. Laura's fear slowly gave way to suspicion. She knew something was wrong, and she could no longer ignore it. One afternoon, while Daniel was out, she tiptoed into the living room and began to search. She told herself she wasn't invading his privacy. She was protecting herself. She checked the common areas first. The kitchen, the cabinets, even under the couch cushions. Nothing unusual. Then, as she crouched near the hallway closet, her fingers brushed against the baseboard and felt a small groove. She tugged gently, and to her shock, the panel shifted, revealing a hidden drawer. Inside was a collection of items that didn't belong together. Old photographs, scraps of paper covered in writing she couldn't decipher, and what looked like strands of hair tied neatly with string. At the very bottom was a small leather-bound journal. Laura flipped it open, but the entries were cryptic, strange symbols, fragmented sentences, names she didn't recognize. Her stomach tightened with every page she turned. A sudden sound from the hallway made her freeze. The front door creaked. Daniel was back. She shoved the drawer shut, pushed the panel into place, and hurried to her room, heart hammering in her chest. From behind her door, she listened to him walk down the hall. His footsteps slowed near the closet, then stopped. If you discovered a hidden stash of disturbing items in your roommate's apartment, would you secretly keep investigating or leave immediately? Let me know what you'd do. The journal haunted Laura. She couldn't stop thinking about the pages she'd seen, the strange symbols, the names scrawled in uneven handwriting. The images replayed in her mind all night, filling her with questions she was too afraid to answer. Who were those people? Why keep hair tied in bundles? The next morning, Daniel seemed unusually calm, even cheerful. He made coffee in the kitchen and asked Laura if she had any weekend plans. His small talk sounded normal, almost too normal, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that he knew she'd found the drawer. Every glance, every pause between his words felt deliberate, as though he was watching for a reaction. Later that evening, when Daniel left again, Laura made a choice. She returned to the closet, pulled the panel aside, and grabbed the journal. This time she flipped further into the entries. Some pages were dated, some weren't. The names repeated, different handwriting styles, as though more than one person had written them. And then she saw it, her own name, scribbled at the very bottom of a page filled with slanted lines and erratic sketches. Her breath caught. She slammed the journal shut and stuffed it back into the drawer, her hands shaking violently. She felt exposed, like every inch of her life inside that apartment had been quietly documented. That night, she locked her door, shoved a chair under the handle, and lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible. If you found your own name written inside your roommate's secret journal, what would you do next? Call the police? Confront them? Or run? Share your answer in the comments. For 2 nights after discovering her name in the journal, Laura barely slept. She jumped at every creak in the floorboards, every hum of the pipes. But on the 3rd night, the noise she dreaded most returned, the scratching. It began faintly, as if someone was dragging nails across wood. This time, it wasn't coming from Daniel's door. It was coming from the wall between their rooms. The sound was steady, deliberate, moving in slow patterns, like someone was tracing invisible shapes into the plaster. Laura pressed her ear against the wall, her breath shallow. The scratching paused, then a soft thump followed, like a fist pressed against the other side. She staggered back, her heart hammering. It was as if Daniel knew she was listening. She waited, frozen in the middle of her room, until the scratching resumed again, slower, heavier, closer to her side of the wall. When it finally stopped, Laura sat on the edge of her bed, trembling. She wanted to believe it was all in her head, but the sound was too real, too deliberate. She realized something terrifying. The wall wasn't just separating their rooms, it was the only barrier between her and whatever Daniel was doing at night. And now it seemed he wanted her to hear it. If you heard scratching from the wall of your roommate's room, would you confront them the next day? Or pretend you never heard it? Comment what you do. The following week, Laura noticed posters going up around the neighborhood. A young woman had gone missing, last seen only a few blocks from their building. The photo on the flyer showed a smiling face, eyes bright with life. Laura stared at it longer than she meant to, unsettled by how close to home it all felt. That evening, when she entered the apartment, Daniel was in the kitchen. He rarely lingered in shared spaces, but tonight he leaned casually against the counter, sipping tea. His eyes flicked toward the flyer she was holding before she even said a word. "Terrible, isn't it?" he asked. His voice was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. Laura forced a nod, her throat dry. She noticed then that his hands were stained faintly red, as if he'd been handling something raw. He caught her staring and quickly wiped them on a towel, smiling faintly as if nothing was wrong. But Laura's heart thudded in her chest. Her thoughts went to the heavy trash bags she had seen, the strange smells, the names in the journal, including hers. That night, she lay in bed with the poster still folded on her desk. The missing woman's face seemed to stare at her in the dark, demanding answers she couldn't give. Every sound from Daniel's room carried more weight, every creak and shuffle twisting into something sinister in her imagination. For the first time, Laura wondered if she was living with someone who was far more dangerous than she'd allowed herself to believe. If your roommate's behavior lined up with a local missing person case, would you call the police immediately or wait until you had proof? Share your thoughts below. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, but only Laura's had a view of the street. Daniel's window faced a narrow alley, tucked out of sight. One night, restless and unable to sleep, Laura glanced through her blinds and noticed something strange. His window was wide open, despite the bitter cold. First, she thought nothing of it, maybe he needed air. But when she looked again an hour later, the window was shut tight, and the blinds were drawn. She hadn't heard him open or close them. What unsettled her more was the sound that followed. A faint scraping from outside, like metal against the fire escape. The next morning, she found muddy footprints leading from the alley to the building's back door. They were smeared, but unmistakably fresh. She mentioned it casually to Daniel at breakfast, asking if he had noticed anything strange outside. He looked at her for a long moment, his spoon resting motionless in his hand, before saying calmly, "You shouldn't be looking out that window at night." The words landed heavier than she expected. He didn't sound concerned for her safety. He sounded like he was giving an order. Laura smiled weakly and dropped the subject, but the truth gnawed at her. What was Daniel doing in the alley in the middle of the night? And more importantly, what or who was he bringing back inside? If you noticed your roommates sneaking in and out through a window at night, would you confront them or start planning to leave? Tell me in the comments. Laura's fear had reached a breaking point. She couldn't keep ignoring the signs, the smells, the sounds, the journal, the missing woman. Everything pointed toward danger. One evening, while Daniel was out, she dialed her best friend, Megan, and whispered everything she'd experienced over the past few weeks. Megan listened in silence, then said firmly, "You need to get out of there, tonight." But Laura shook her head, pacing the small bedroom. Leaving wasn't simple. The lease tied her down. Her job was close by, and she worried what Daniel might do if he realized she was trying to escape. "I just need proof," she whispered. "Something solid before I go to the police." Megan insisted on coming over, but Laura begged her not to. "He'll know. He notices everything," she explained, lowering her voice as though Daniel could hear her through the walls. Her hands trembled as she locked her door and double-checked the window. She promised Megan she'd call again in the morning. When the call ended, Laura sat in the dark, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Every creak in the hallway made her jolt. Every gust of wind against the window set her nerves on edge. She felt trapped between fear and inaction, too afraid to stay, too terrified to leave. And as she drifted into a light, restless sleep, a single thought echoed in her mind. Daniel already knew more about her than she realized. If you were Laura, would you flee immediately with no proof, or risk staying to gather evidence against your roommate? Comment what you'd do. The next day, while Daniel was gone, Laura finally worked up the courage to search again. She moved quickly, her pulse racing, determined to find something that would confirm her fears. She returned to the closet, pulled the hidden drawer open, and retrieved the journal. This time, she forced herself to read past the strange symbols. The further she went, the more chilling it became. Several pages listed dates, carefully written one after the other. Next to some of the dates were initials, followed by words she couldn't fully decipher. Some were crossed out, others circled. Her eyes caught on one particular entry, a date from only 3 days earlier, with a single initial scrawled beside it. The same initial as the name on the missing person's flyer. Laura's stomach twisted. She snapped photos of the pages with her phone, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped it. She knew this was the proof Megan had urged her to get. She slid the journal back into place and carefully reset the panel. Then she rushed to her room, heart pounding, clutching her phone as if it were her only weapon. That night, Daniel acted like nothing had changed. He made tea, asked her about her day, and retreated to his room. But every word he spoke felt loaded, every glance suspicious. Laura sat silently at the kitchen table, nodding mechanically, praying he couldn't sense what she had done. Deep down, though, she knew it was only a matter of time before he realized the journal had been touched. If you found disturbing evidence that your roommate might be connected to a missing person, would you call the police immediately, or wait until you were far away first? Tell me in the comments. The following morning, Laura woke to a chilling discovery. Her phone, the one she had hidden under her pillow after photographing the journal, was sitting neatly on her desk. The screen faced upward, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. Her stomach knotted. She hadn't moved it. She checked the phone in a panic. The photos were gone. Every image of the journal deleted. She scrolled frantically, hoping they'd be in the recently deleted folder, but that too was empty. She sat frozen, her breath coming shallow and quick. There was only one explanation. Daniel had been in her room while she slept. When she finally gathered the courage to leave her bedroom, Daniel was already in the kitchen, calmly sipping tea. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable, and said, "You should really start locking your door again." His tone was casual, but the words sank into her like ice. He knew she'd seen the journal. He knew she had taken the photos. And now, he wanted her to know that nothing she did was hidden from him. Laura forced herself to sit at the table, though every instinct screamed at her to run. Daniel smiled faintly, as though satisfied with her silence. The atmosphere between them had shifted completely. She was no longer just suspicious of him. He was letting her know she was being watched. If you discovered your roommate had gone through your phone and deleted incriminating photos, would you stay quiet or confront them outright? Share your answer below. That night, Laura didn't take any chances. She locked her bedroom door and wedged a chair tightly under the handle. She checked it twice, tugging the knob until she was sure it wouldn't budge. For the first time in weeks, she felt a shred of control. But sometime after midnight, she woke to the sound of pressure against the door. At first, it was subtle, the faint rattle of the knob. Then it grew louder, more insistent, until the chair scraped slightly against the floor. Laura sat up in bed, her chest tightening, her breath caught in her throat. Someone was trying to get in. She stayed completely still, clutching her phone in one hand, her eyes locked on the trembling door. The knob twisted harder this time, jerking against the lock. The chair groaned under the weight pressing on it. Then came silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Seconds crawled into minutes before the sound of slow footsteps retreated down the hallway. A door closed, and the apartment fell quiet again. Laura sat awake until dawn, unable to move, her body trembling with adrenaline. When she finally cracked her bedroom door open in the morning, the chair had deep indentations in the wood floor where it had been forced forward. Daniel's door, as always, was locked tight. He never mentioned the noise, and that was what terrified her most, because she knew, without question, that he had been the one at her door. If someone tried to force their way into your locked bedroom in the middle of the night, would you leave the next day, or wait to gather more evidence? Comment what you do. Laura knew she couldn't survive much longer in that apartment. The journal, the missing photos, the attempted entry into her locked room, it was all proof enough. The only question now was how to get out without tipping Daniel off. The next morning, she made herself act normal. She forced a smile when Daniel asked about her shift at work. She even joined him briefly in the living room, pretending to watch the muted TV. But inside, her thoughts were racing. That afternoon, when she was sure he wasn't home, she packed a small bag, just essentials, nothing that would be noticed right away. She stashed it beneath her bed, ready to grab at a moment's notice. She also wrote down everything she'd seen. The journal entries, the initials, the dates, the strange smells, the noises at night. She slipped the note into her bag alongside her ID and a spare phone charger. This wasn't just for her safety. It was in case something happened and she couldn't tell the story herself. That night, she barely slept, waiting for dawn to arrive. The apartment felt suffocating, every creak of the floorboards outside her door pulling her deeper into dread. But Laura was determined. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow she would leave. Would you risk sneaking out quietly to escape, or confront your roommate before leaving? Share your thoughts below. Laura woke early, her packed bag hidden under her arm as she crept down the hall. The apartment was silent. Daniel's door remained shut. She paused for a moment, listening for the sound of breathing or movement on the other side, but heard nothing. Slowly, carefully, she slipped on her shoes and unlocked the front door. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the hallway. She told herself she'd just go to work early and never come back. But as she turned to close the door behind her, something stopped her cold. Daniel's door creaked open an inch, just enough for her to see the edge of his shadow in the gap. He was awake. He'd been listening. Laura's hands shook as she pulled the door shut and hurried down the stairs. Every step felt like it echoed through the building. She didn't look back until she was outside on the street, gulping in the cool morning air. For the first time in weeks, she felt a fragile sense of freedom. But even as she walked quickly toward the bus stop, Her mind spun with fear. Had he seen the bag? Had he guessed she was leaving for good? She didn't know. What she did know was that Daniel had been waiting, watching, and if he realized she wasn't coming back, she feared he wouldn't let her go so easily. If you discovered your dangerous roommate was awake and watching as you tried to leave, would you still run? Or go back inside and pretend nothing happened? Comment your choice below. Laura didn't go to work that morning. Instead, she stayed on the bus, riding it far across town until she reached a busy cafe. She picked a corner seat, her bag close against her side, and finally allowed herself to breathe. For the first time, she felt some distance between her and Daniel, but she also knew it wouldn't last. With trembling hands, she called Megan. The moment Megan answered, Laura's voice cracked as she recounted everything. The journal, the initials, the attempted break-in, the photos deleted from her phone. Megan didn't hesitate. Laura, you can't go back there. You need to take this to the police. But when Laura looked down at her phone, her stomach dropped. The note she had typed with all her evidence, the one she had stored in her bag, was gone. The file had been wiped clean. She froze, realizing it wasn't just the photos that had disappeared. Somehow, Daniel had deleted that too. It felt impossible, but she couldn't deny what was missing. She hung up quickly, scanning the cafe. Every man with dark hair, every figure near the window made her stomach twist. Was Daniel already following her? She clutched her bag tighter and whispered to herself, just one night away, then I'll go to the police. But deep down, she knew running wasn't going to be that simple. If you escaped and made it safely to a public place, would you go to the police immediately or wait to gather more proof? Let me know in the comments. By late evening, Laura checked into a budget motel on the edge of town. She locked the door, dragged a chair under the knob, just as she had at the apartment, and sat on the bed with her bag at her feet. Exhaustion pressed down on her, but fear kept her wide awake. She picked up her phone, scrolling through her contacts, considering calling the police again. That's when she saw it, a new text message. The sender was an unknown number, but the words froze her in place. You forgot something. Her chest tightened. Hands trembling, she opened the message. Attached was a photo of her bedroom back at the apartment. The angle was from inside the room, directed at her bed, the very spot where she had slept every night. But in this photo, her bed was empty. The timestamp read only an hour ago. Laura dropped the phone. The motel room suddenly felt like it was closing in on her, every shadow a threat. How had he taken that photo? Was Daniel still in the apartment? Or was he already closer than she realized? She forced herself to the window and pulled the curtain back. The parking lot was nearly empty, but in the far corner, a car idled with its lights off. She backed away, her pulse racing. It was no longer a question of whether Daniel knew she had left. It was clear now. He was following her, step by step, and he wanted her to know it. If you received a chilling text from your stalker roommate showing your empty bed after you escaped, what would you do next? Run again? Or call the police right there? Comment your choice. Laura's hands shook as she dialed 911. She whispered her location to the dispatcher, her voice cracking, every word laced with panic. The operator told her to stay inside, to remain calm, that officers were on the way. But calm was impossible. Every second felt like an eternity. Then came the sound that shattered her. A knock at the motel door. Not hurried, not frantic. Slow, deliberate. Each thud rattled through her chest. Laura backed away until her shoulders pressed against the far wall. Eyes locked on the door where the chair trembled against the knob. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by silence. Laura's phone nearly slipped from her hand as the dispatcher repeated instructions. Don't open the door. Help is coming. Stay on the line. But Laura could barely hear. Her attention was fixed on the shadow sliding across the thin gap at the bottom of the door. Someone was standing there, unmoving, watching. Red and blue lights finally cut across the motel curtains. Sirens swelled, filling the air outside. The shadow shifted, then disappeared. Moments later, police burst through the hallway, pounding on Laura's door, announcing themselves. When she dared to open it, Daniel was gone. Only the faint hum of a car speeding into the distance broke the night. Laura was safe for now, but as she clutched her bag and answered the officer's questions, a chilling truth sank in. Daniel hadn't tried to hurt her in the apartment. He hadn't even tried to stop her from leaving. He wanted the chase, and somewhere out there he was still watching, waiting. If you were in Laura's position, would you ever feel safe again? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story unsettled you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true disturbing tales.